Okay, awesome. Yeah. So let's kick it off. Welcome, Perry. Again, thank you so much for joining. Yeah. And
Yeah, thanks for having me.
yeah, it's an honor to have you. Because of course, Perry is all over the core protocol development and research. You can bump into him in if you're following the ACD, if you're following the current DevNets, if you've been looking into how the core protocol is being developed and tested over past maybe more than 2 years at this point, since before way before merge. So it's great to have you here. And of course, the thing is that many people already know you because we have had you in Brussels for the discussion with Terence, but most of the people couldn't make it to Brussels, so I was hoping to be here to have a chance to get to know you better. And I already asked you about your background there, so maybe you can keep it shorter. But let's start with this, like just how you got into Ethereum, where you're coming from. Yeah, a little bit about your story.
Yeah, really high level. I got interested in Ethereum. Well, I initially got interested in Bitcoin when I was in my bachelor's. And during my master's, a close friend of mine told me about Ethereum. And the introduction was more like imagine Bitcoin, but you can do computation on top. So you can build anything you like with money, programmable money, which blew my mind at the time. And I tried doing a small research project during my master's thesis, and I liked it quite a bit. So I spent a few years afterwards at Slockit working on IoT and blockchain together. And that's where I was introduced to the world of DevOps by a close colleague who was basically sitting next to me, and we got along. So that was my introduction to the DevOps space. And 2020, there was a tweet by the infamous Justin Drake about Ethereum starting a security team. So I applied for the security team. I did not get in, but I had a bunch of ideas on how to test Ethereum and how to like automate some things. So they decided to hire me at the DevOps team instead. And since then, I've been here, and I mainly help with protocol upgrades. So whatever needs to be done for that process. Sometimes it's more research focused. So trying to understand how many blobs can mainnet handle, right? Like we arrived at the number 36 through some methodology. So we had to spend some time thinking about it. Someone had to run the monitoring. Someone had to help figure out the analysis. So that was me as well as a lot of people on my team. And sometimes it's something like setting up a DevNet, or there's a mainnet issue and you need to just dig into figuring out what happened. So kind of jump wherever it's needed, but whatever is related to the protocol.
Thank you so much, Perry. Yeah, awesome. And of course, now there's been a lot of things happening well since then and these days with spectra testing. Can you maybe give us an overview of what all kinds of things are you working on now? Not even in the past, just like maybe these days, apart from like dropping the Jitsi maintenance. What what cool stuff is happening? What you're working on?
Yeah. I'll maybe phrase it a bit as not just the stuff I'm working on, but also other people on the team, because the ETH Panda Ops team tends to have a very high overlap because of the way we're structured. The way we're structured is that we have a subset of people working on data, a subset working on tooling, and a subset working on integration. And then each of us has our own vertical. So we spent a decent chunk of time optimizing ourselves as much as we can. As a result, you can never say that one person worked on this, but a group worked on a lot of things. So on the Pectra front, I've been spending a lot of time on DevNet 3. So DevNet 3 is live as of last week, and this includes 7702 as the EIP. So in case someone's interested in trying out account abstraction and how this is going to look, please feel free to experiment with that. And before we launched the DevNet, we went through a couple of cycles of local testing. So we did that with Kurtosis, and we didn't have to change anything in Kurtosis itself, which was great. But there is a testing tool we use called Asserter. And the issue was that every time there was a new feature, the testing team, so Mario as well, not this Mario, but Mario Vega, as well as his team would write 1,000 tests. And then we'd write like, I don't know, 50 tests for the exact same behavior, but on different layers of the stack. Instead of both of us doing repetitive work, we wanted to figure out how we can better harmonize it so that one person writes the tests and other people can use it. So we have a new module in Asserter that can now consume the execution spec tests. So the execution spec tests become the source of truth for the tests, and then the test nets are just one way to consume it. And doing this consumption led to a certain number of bugs, especially ones that happen via the engine API that aren't triggered locally, but are triggered on devnets and local devnets and public devnets. So we found a few bugs, we already cleaned them up, and then we had the public devnet launch. Now the focus is a bit more to get people to use 7702 and try and trigger some issues there and start doing some edge case testing with MaxEP. So that's the Petra box that's happening. At the same time, PeerDAS is a active research topic as well. And in PeerDAS, it's been really interesting because there's a issue where the DevNet essentially works perfectly fine for about 10 epochs or so, and then breaks. We still don't know why. So the reason of why it breaks is to me not that important because I'm sure we have so many smart devs, we'll figure it out given the time. But the approach that me and the team usually think about it is how could we have shortened that dev time? Like, how could we have optimized or helped people figure out tools to make this easier? And one approach is the stuff that Katya is working on, which is metrics. So having metrics help us find visibility and whatever blind spots are available. And then, if you were listening to the PeerTask call, breakout room call today, Jimmy and I spent a bunch of time last week trying to understand how to better visualize what's happening on the network. Right. So one thing that was missing was which peer is supposed to have which column. It's trivial if you have the peer ID, but if I have 30 nodes, doing this manually for 30 times on that website is really cumbersome. So someone on the team just added this as a feature to Dora. So there's just a view. I don't know if it's deployed yet, but will be deployed soon. So you can just get a global view of who's supposed to have what information, and you just load a page, and you don't have to think about it again. That's an example of an optimization. And another one that we're spending cycles on is when there's invalid things happening on the P2P layer, how do we get visibility over it to help on the debugging side? So Lodestar might be saying that it's supposed to have custody of column 3 and 5, but if I ask it for 5, it's not giving it to me. Then that's something that has to be surfaced somehow. And that is ideally not the answer should not be read the logs because that's just not a scalable solution for finding issues. So we're spending some time, and at least the answer that I like the most is having potentially a debug namespace for network that is like the Beacon API event stream. You can have a network API event stream. And then you could like whoever's interested can subscribe to this, and you could also build really cool one layer top visualization. So you essentially push the problem to someone else, but it's in a nice abstracted way that the problem is maintainable in the future. And this is something that would be useful for PRS, but also potentially future upgrades, DAS in general, networking changes in general. There's people who are working on formal verification of the P2P layer or formal modeling of the P2P layer. This would be useful for them as well. So it's an answer that is happy for me. So yeah, these are the two large buckets. There's a third large bucket, EOF. Unfortunately, my knowledge of the EVM is horrible. Chances are it's significantly worse than almost everyone on this call. For me, it's a nice black box where I send things in and things come out. Mario Vega is the person to talk about that box, or Philip from the team is the person to talk about that box. But yeah, that's the third box that I don't have that much in yet. But yeah, Philip and others on the team are looking into it. I think that's most of my time spending on these three
Yeah,
pieces.
thank you so much, Pari. Yeah, it's a wide range of things that you and the DevOps are working on, Panda Ops. Yeah, and there is just so much great tooling and initiatives coming from you all over the place. And I saw also fellows using it to for their work or just learning about a protocol. I think it's amazing. So I hope fellows have some questions regarding all these initiatives, I have a first one. But folks, if you have anything, feel free to raise your hands. I wanted to just check before we dive into all those questions about the state of the torrentifying for force and the era format. Whether there is, I still have torrent. I'm seeding it, so like whether I should dump it or should I get a new one, or yeah, what's the state? But yeah.
Just some, I guess, context for people who might not have heard about this. EIP44 is an attempt at dropping history. Um, this is super interesting because nodes right now need to store all the data, right, from Genesis up until now. And we're starting to hit limits such that it doesn't fit in a 2 terabyte disk anymore, 2 terabyte SSD, and people have to upgrade to 4 terabyte drives. But there's no real reason to store, for example, the last from the years 2015 to 2020 unless you're requesting it. As long as you can ensure that the network has this information somewhere, right? And you can fetch it if you want to. Like if you're an RPC provider, it's interesting. If you're a home staker, not really. So EIP44 is the first attempt at dropping, for example, pre-merge history. And now the question is, okay, if I drop it from every node, where's the history? How do I get it? That answer is unfortunately not specified in EIP44s, so we have to get creative with it. And one very famous answer is to use the portal network for this. And a lot of client teams are looking to integrate portal network in some way or form to enable this feature set. But another approach that I was suggesting is to use a torrent. So a client could just have the torrent file built in. Torrents come with the benefit of its checksum. Everything is it's a proven technology. It's existed for 20 something years at this point. Scalable, and Ericon actually already uses torrents in their client for syncing. So it's also an attempt at a technology that a client team has used for the last few years with a lot of success. So rather than reinventing the wheel, my approach was like, why not just take this approach that works and apply it to something else? And maybe some clients do torrent sync or like torrent EIP44s. Some clients do portal network, and that's also the future that I envision, that clients start to get specialized for different use cases or allow the user to decide. That would also be fine. But there's no real update. I think clients are still looking into it, but Pectra is so big that no one has the extra cycles to work on this, I guess.
Yeah, of course. It's also like sort of a soft fork, right? Like, I mean, we don't need to include anywhere, just activate one point. Yeah. So,
Exactly.
just to reiterate a bit, I should keep the torrent. There is no new version
Yes.
because you mentioned there will be some update to it, or last time we talked.
There's a new version of the torrent because there was the proofs file missing in the torrent, and now
Yeah,
there's a
I
version of the
remember.
torrent with the proofs file inside. I
Yeah,
still
yeah,
don't necessarily agree with the change. So my argument was that if you're getting the thing you're proving in the torrent, that doesn't really make sense to me. It's
yeah,
like I give you a false proof and then I give you false data, and you're using the proof to verify that the data is valid. So it made sense for me to bake in the proofs in the client and to get the data from somewhere else. So you get it from two sources and then you compare. That
yeah.
wasn't the client team's view on it. So they requested the proofs to be in there. So I did the same. And that's why we have moved. And the way torrents work is the moment you change one file, the whole torrent file changes.
Yeah, of course. So yeah, I have the old one, which is better. Basically, I get the roots file from
Yeah,
GitHub, right? So from the external
exactly.
source. Yeah, that's pretty cool. Yeah, thanks for diving into that because yeah, I think it's also very interesting, and we don't talk about the historic expiry here much. And but we have Chirag waiting for a while. Do you have a question for us?
So I had a question, but I forgot while I was thinking about EIP 44s. So I have a question on 44s instead. Would it make sense, because since it's like a one out of n trust model, would it make sense to like just generalize an API of sorts or an interface of sorts, so that people can choose any kind of medium. Like basically, I can also put it on my Google Drive, right? The entire history. If obviously the Google Drive does not support that bigger storage, but I could do that, right? Does that make sense
Yeah.
as a step in protocol?
Yeah, in general, I think it does. One approach is rather than doing it via APIs, you can do this via file system in itself. So you can just say this folder is where the 4.4's data is. It's a defined format, the ERA file format. And if you have your data in Google Drive, you can mount it as like slash Google Drive slash ELP44. And then when you run the client, you just pass it 4.4's data is over here. So the file system already abstracts away everything you need it to.
Okay, makes sense. Also, sorry, can I ask the second question, or does Katya want to ask first?
Yeah, go on, go on.
Okay. So regarding I had a look through like in the start of the cohort, there were some tooling for P2P project ideas, but in general, since I'm dealing with P2P right now, there's a lot of difficulty in defining test cases themselves for like a decentralized network. Like, are there any tips or tricks that you guys employ to define test cases?
What test cases are you imagining?
Anything that tests decentralized behavior, basically, like in an abstract sense.
So there's kind of two testing approaches, right? And that's also indicative of the two testing teams we have. So the EF testing team, the approach is very much here is a pre-state, here is something that happens, and here is a post-state. So it's very defined. So in the scenario that you're talking about, you would probably use Hive and you'd have a pre-state, and then a block comes in via the network interface, and then you have a post-state to check for something. This tends to work really well for edge cases that you know you want to implement. Like this is the pre-state. When this block happens, I want the node to fail, or I want the node to succeed, or I want it to import in a certain way. The second approach is I call it a bit more like behavioral integration testing, and that's the part that the ETH ops team tends to do, where um, I know that the network has to fork and it has to fork for 10 epochs. I don't care what state it was in before. I just want to make sure it's healthy. And after 10 epochs, I join the network again. And then I want to see how it happens. So this is like you want to assert a certain behavior that you want the network to have. And for that, Cadosis plus there's a tool called AttackNet, and a modified version of that should be released relatively soon, or an updated version relatively soon. And that allows you to define these behaviors and then assert that the behavior is indeed true. So you can assert that the node is fine after a reorg, that it's fine after a network split, that it's fine if NTP was changed. So it uses the chaos testing framework of Kubernetes to make all of these changes. But that is a world that is still extremely new. I think we have like a lot of space for improving our network testing stack. So might not even be the answer you're looking for. Um, but the Ethereum motto still stands true. If you're asking if someone is working on something, the answer is you.
Yeah, makes sense. Yeah, it answers my question pretty much. Yeah.
Okay, we had Katya before. I'm not sure if you jumped into it. Yeah. So you can go ahead.
Yeah. I have a question for Perry. I was always wondering how hard fork goes on the backstage. Is it like quite intense tweak, or maybe it depends? Could you please tell more about your experience?
I think there's a lot of phases. So right now is kind of a ramp up phase again because we might be splitting the fork into two. So suddenly it's if we sprint a bit, we can actually ship the fork quickly. So there's a known definition. The nodes are starting to get stable. So for example, if you came a month ago, the way to find a bug is to just run a client and you find a bug. So it's very trivial. It doesn't take that much mental effort. It's easy. So at that downtime, we try to focus on updating our stack, making our tooling better, and stuff like that. Today, the networks are mostly stable, and they're also mostly stable on the happy path. So now is when it gets really hard that the payoff for the tools we've built will kind of be felt now. So we have to start pushing the nodes into edge cases. We have to start doing sync testing. We have to start doing reorgs. We have to start doing all of these edge case tests, and hopefully find a bug. And so the downside is there's no time where we can say we've done everything. This will be a flawless fork. It will always be a guess. Um, I think the easiest approach I have is the harder it finds to get bugs, probably the more secure the fork is. So we try to wait until there's like a few cycles where there's nothing found. Yeah, and then I feel like we're kind of ready for the fork. But usually just before the fork is very relaxing because once we've agreed to it and client releases are out, there's not that much we can do anymore.
I think we lost Katya while you were answering, so I'm not sure if you got it.
See the recording, yeah. I almost heard everything.
Okay.
Okay, that's
Sorry, bad connection, sorry.
Yeah, get most of it anyway. Yeah, thank you so much, Pari. And Daniel, do you have a question as well?
Yeah, a bit of an open question. In your opinion, what is like the biggest disadvantage or problem with kurtosis-based testing, and what is the biggest problem or disadvantage of DevNet-based testing? Yeah.
I think anything network related is scary for me in general because for EVM related changes, right? Kurtosis doesn't play a big deal. It's honestly most of the bugs are found on Hive, most of them are found in execution spec tests. Kurtosis is more of a sanity check at that point. The DevNet is where it will be public, so there'll be real world latency involved. I don't know, the random person on Twitter might submit an interesting transaction and break stuff. So that's why DevNets are really interesting from the EVM layer. So kurtosis for EVM focused upgrades for me is just sanity checking. It's nothing else. It's an easy way to parallelize development. You don't need to wait for a lighthouse dev to update something. You can try 10 different images locally without having to disturb anyone. For peer-to-peer testing like PeerDAS, that's where it gets really interesting because you can run experiments for a longer time on different hardware and try and see if you can trigger a bug. And an example of that is the one we're currently facing with the PeerDAS DevNets. We still don't know it. But at the same time, 4 people parallelly are trying different things. And maybe one person finds out what the issue is. Additionally, kurtosis adds the ability to do these chaos tests, which we really haven't explored much yet. But I think the payoff is really high for example, for PeerDAS. You can do a lot of reorgs, you can have memory issues and things like, or drop packets or corrupted packets and stuff like this, which would be really nice for a full stack of the client. But I would say 99% of the unlock comes from just these sanity checks, kurtosis runs in the CI, the parallelizability, etc. So it's more like regression testing and integration testing more than anything else.
Thank you.
Yeah. And actually, one more thing I do want to add is the initial idea when we set it up was that it's used for prototyping, which I'm hoping I do see enough people using. So, for example, if you're building a new MEV stack or a new MEV boost replacement, it's perfect for that. You already know that what you're building works over all the clients, etc. There's a person who released a it's not DVT, but it's kind of like distributed signer tech. It's like a layer that's in between the validator as well as the Web3 signer. I forget the exact tool. They use kurtosis extensively to prototype the whole thing. And they knew that when they released, it'll work with all the clients, all the ELs, all the CLs. And I think part of the reason why it feels like it finds less today is that So a year ago, when kurtosis was like relatively feature new, um, all we had to do was run Prism with a Nimbus node, and we found like 4 inconsistencies. So like over the year, we've cleaned these things up, but we just didn't have such a tool to check all of these things back then. So I think it fills that role really well. But yeah, it has a niche. It's not meant for everything.
One random thought I have about kurtosis now is that I'm actually happy that it's like third-party software, that it's not all PandaOps or Hive, and it's actually somebody else doing this useful tooling for the core protocol, not just you.
For sure, for
So
sure.
it's
Yeah.
a bit more distributed, yeah. And
Yeah.
yeah, Chirag has a question, so go ahead.
Yeah. So my question was much more on like administrative side of things, a little bit on that side, maybe. But what is the incident response procedure for Ethereum? Like in 0 day or something like that. What do you guys do? The first thing.
Yeah. So there's 2 things, right? One is there's a 0 day that has not been actively exploited on mainnet, and two, there's a 0 day that has been actively exploited on mainnet, or mainnet has broken for whatever reason. For stuff that has not been exploited, that's clearly the domain of the security team. So we have security at ethereum.org. There's a bug bounty. There's a Vitalik's on vacation. Surprisingly, Vitalik's never on the incident response calls or even the groups. To be honest, I don't think he's that person. Yeah, so the security team is mostly responsible for that. They are the ones that will validate the 0 day, figure out with client teams how to patch stuff. All of that is their domain. Chances are I won't even hear about a lot of 0 days. There was a nice paper that someone shared today. I didn't even know about the attack, which was perfect. When stuff happens on mainnet, there's typically 2 to 3 ways we get notified. So we run a lot of nodes. We have alerting in-house. So when something happens on mainnet, chances are we've been alerted ASAP. And based on what the severity is or what's going on, we also have some fine-grained alerting. So for example, if mainnet participation was to drop even by 10%, we get an alert. But clearly that isn't critical enough to wake someone up at 3 a.m. It's probably a client issue. We can deal with it in due time. But if mainnet stops finalizing, that's basically all hands on deck. We need to start dealing with this ASAP. Rule of thumb, every mainnet issue has happened either when I'm on vacation with my partner or on a Saturday or a Sunday, because the last time it happened, she was like, is this a rule? Like when we're spending time mainnet breaks? But yeah, I think the only big incident we've had was the issue where mainnet stopped finalizing last year, May. It was an issue with Prism. And how it tends to work is alerts go off. We tend to create a small group to begin with to start looking at whatever's going on. If we identify that we try to identify if it's a CL issue or an EL issue, because the competencies to debug both of them are very different, and that tends to be quite apparent. So just looking at which clients are broken or what the logs say will already tell you that. Then based on if it's a CL or EL issue, we add more people to the group, more CL team or more EL team. There's of course enough people from both sides, but just the mass of the group will change based on which side has the issue. And then start to narrow down what's going on. Is there some common trend? Are all Prism nodes offline? Are all X nodes offline, etc.? And the way we tend to do that is we have a lot of data analysis tools. Like Zatu is an example of one that we tend to use, or we tend to use Dora, or we have like an internal version of Dora, or just public explorers or client teams running their own nodes. So then we look at what's going on there and then dig more and more to see what the common factor is and find stuff. I think the ETH Panda Ops team or client devs in general are only useful for the first like 15-20 minutes. At some point, you identify which client is broken, and then it's honestly completely up to them, and we're just playing support. So if they say, hey, can I have a trace from that node? We fetch it and we give it to them. Or hey, can you run this patch and see if it fits? That's all we can do. Most of my work is spent in like the first 15-20 minutes organizing things. After that, chances of me finding out what exactly went wrong are very low.
Cool. Makes sense.
And also the other thing is, if all of our tooling fails and all of our alerts fail, usually Twitter is quite responsive. So
Yeah, and yeah, I always had a respect, like when there was even some minor incident, teams are able to put out hot fixes in like a couple of hours, basically, or in a
yeah.
day. So it's always a great work.
Earlier this year was actually very interesting. There was 5 weeks in a row where every week some other client had a mainnet incident. And this was before we did the Denkun fork, or we were agreeing on doing the Denkun fork. And literally, it was even on the weekend. And at some point, we were making fun about how these things always happen on the weekend. There was a Bezu issue, there was a Nimbus issue, there was Nethermind, and then there was 2 other client teams that had issues on mainnet releases. But everyone hotfixed like within hours. I think the Bezu issue, we had like a really nice record for that. Within 30 minutes, we had identified what the problem was, and within an hour, we had a release out, something like that. It was very impressive.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you so much, Perry. We have a question waiting from Dan.
Perfect.
Hey, Pari. Are we going to have Petra scheduled in 2 forks, probably? And if that's the case, what's the procedure? Will DevNet 3 be taken to delivery point, and in the meantime work on 4 or with the rest, or what's the?
Yeah, I've been a fan of splitting the fork for a while. I think there was a position paper also from the team like 6 months ago where I was a fan of 2 small forks instead of 1 big one. So I'm very much in support of 2 small forks, but the final decision will still lie on all core devs this week. I'm trying to get a temperature check from different breakout rooms, etc. It seems like most client devs are also in agreement that 2 forks is a good idea. That being said, Petra DevNet 3 that has all the EIPs that we want to ship, but there are still changes and there are updates to the spec that need to be made, PRs that have been merged. So we will probably do DevNet 4 just with updated specs. And that would be considered feature freeze. And the only things that will be put forward are builder API changes, remote signer API changes, and bugs that we find on the DevNet. So we would ideally not want to keep working on the spec beyond what stage DevNet 4 would be. We don't want to stop PeerDAS. So PeerDAS will get its own DevNet cycle, and that's based off of the last release of the Petra cycle. And we're still working the organization out for this, but essentially right now Petra is on CL specs 1.5. So PeerDAS will say, okay, we're working off of CL 1.5 dash Petra, right? Oh, dash PeerDAS. Same for the EOF guys. So they will say execution spec test has a release, EOF version 1.6, and that's the version that we pin for EOF devnets. Ideally, sooner rather than later, EOF and PeerDAS start becoming one devnet, but for now, it still makes sense to keep us 2. So we would have a grand total of 4 devnets: Petra, EOF, PeerDAS, Workl.
Right. And between 3 and 4, do you have like a rough estimation? Will it be some months, 2, 3, 4
I think it
months?
should be on the weeks timeline. That's what we were discussing today as to how much work some of the EIPs are. I think it would be weeks, but one of the things I want to make sure is in DevNet 4 is the builder spec changes. That hasn't been done at all yet, and in my opinion is a blocker. So it would make sense for someone to first work on them, to already have the implementation in DevNet 4, because then we can also have the builders and relays start updating and getting ready for the fork, and they'll have a testing target.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you. Yeah, before we get to the common questions, Momad, do you have a question?
Yes, I have a question. I want to know, out of curiosity though, how do you manage log aggregation in terms of troubleshooting multiple clients at the same time?
Yeah, so we use this tool called Loki, and Promptail is it. So we have this tiny agent that runs on all of our machines that we run. It takes the logs and then it passes it forward to a central server. This central server is running a software called Loki. And what Loki does is it puts it in a nice database along with all the information. It's a time series database. And if you're in the DevOps world, time series is a really nice thing to have because it's compatible with Prometheus, and Prometheus is what we use for metrics. So we have Grafana, which is a dashboard visualization interface, and it can visualize any sort of time series, which means you can put in logs, you can put in metrics, you can do whatever. So if, for example, you are reacting to an incident, you basically go to grafana.observability.ethpandaops.io. You can expect that metrics from all of the instances are there. You can expect that logs from all of the instances are there. We run this as a service for all client teams, so everyone from different client teams get access. Some dashboards are public, but not all. If you're interested in digging in, nothing in this stack is secret. So it's like very loose privilege. So if an EPF fellow is like, hey, I want to dig through stuff, we give them access. There's nothing there you can really break. There's nothing sensitive. There's zero validators or anything.
Yeah, go ahead if you want to follow up, Boma.
Okay, what about approaches in handling some kind of sign, like in terms of recovery of consensus clients? Like, how does that happen? I mean,
What do you mean by
backstage,
recovery?
syncing.
In terms of syncing, or
Yes. Like, how do you guys handle it? Yes.
when there's a mainnet issue, or when, could you maybe
In
expand on the question?
in general, if it does happen.
In general, if there's a mainnet issue and we have to recover the consensus set.
Yeah.
Yeah. So if there's a mainnet issue, there's one of two things. One is the client can have a patch, and the patch will allow you to continue going on the same fork, right? The second one is if a node is stuck on an imported block and no patch can revert this block. In that scenario, you need to do a resync. But if it's a resync, then the clients would have to make a release and specify in the release that everyone affected has to resync the CL. And since we mainly do checkpoint sync, that shouldn't be too much of a strain on the network in itself.
Okay, thank you. Katia, and we lost her again.
Oh.
Okay. So yeah, to the common questions. There was a first one from Rahul about whether you use AI for some data analysis, or yeah, what sort of tooling maybe?
There's people who've kind of talked about it in the past, but I don't think anyone's actively done it yet. So if you're interested, please feel free. There's a ton of data out there. We also publish all of the data. So in general, check out the website, ethpandaops.io. And if you go to data, we have data sets. If you have a very specific test or a very specific analysis or something you're looking into, we can also provide you direct access to the ClickHouse cluster. So we're using ClickHouse to store the metrics. But if otherwise, you can just download the Parquet files and run the analysis locally. We are not using any AI tools at the moment, but yeah, maybe in the future we would use some sort of analysis. But in the end, you would need it mostly for anomaly detection, but P2P networks or Ethereum in general tends to be so noisy that anomaly detection can be too fine grained, and we want to be careful about like false negatives. And we just stick to like basic alerts, like participation drop is a good proxy for something that's wrong. But yeah, there's probably a lot of low hanging fruit that we could get with better analysis tools.
Yeah, Rahul, if you want to elaborate.
Yeah, you mentioned you work with Bucket File. I believe you are logging a lot of archival data, and the size of archive matters to you. Have you done like experiments with what kind of data works? Like, is it Arrow or Parquet? And what are the pros and cons between these files formats?
Yeah. We have done analysis. I only know the outcome of the analysis. Reach out to either Sam or Andrew on the team who are in charge of that whole world. One of the other reasons for us choosing Parquet was it's also just a well understood standard format. Flashbox is releasing some stuff as Parquet format. We are releasing some stuff. There's like Paradigm also has some data sets as Parquet. So it was also part of the approach of like, let's not build something new, because if I have an analysis pipeline, two things are Parquet and one is something else, that doesn't really work out. Let's just standardize and use the same thing. We also do some cross importing. So we import the Flashbox data set into our data set. Most of it is requirement driven. There's the ARC team, so Applied Research Group at the EF, and Tony is like a super user of our data set. So if he's, we try to cater to the people who are doing the analysis. So if they require this data set in a certain format, then we try to achieve that. And yeah, in general, we haven't noticed much issues with Parquet or with ClickHouse, so we've stuck with both of the stacks.
On that note, I think one issue I face with Parquet is that it doesn't support appending new data. Have you faced the same issue? Is there a workaround?
No, because we particularly use Parquet as our export format. So we've never had the issue where we had to append stuff to it. We just export it again and make it as a new data set. All the appending and all of that operations happens one layer higher in ClickHouse, where that's our real data source. So if you're someone who's looking a lot into data analysis, then we can give you direct access to ClickHouse if you want. And then you can use your Jupyter notebooks against a cluster that has everything already set up for you.
Cool. And lastly, do you prefer working from an office, or do you like working from home?
I think I like a mix. So office days are my social days. I try to have like a long lunch, meet with people, stuff like that. So it tends to be one day in the week, and then the other 4 days I like at home. It's a mix.
Nice, thank you guys. Yeah, we have many questions come in both chat. Let's prioritize the guys on the call. Katya, you've been waiting for a while.
Yeah, thank you. What happens if the validator has been slashed and it's not his fault? If there were any issues while updating consensus clients, is it a use case or not? Do you investigate every slash accident? Or?
We try to keep an eye on why every slashing happened, especially if it's something unexpected. At least in the last few years, it was never anything unexpected. We don't necessarily do the entire analysis ourselves. The each taker guys have been extremely helpful, because every time there's an issue, they, especially with home stakers, they tend to spend a lot of time talking to them and understanding why the problem happened. So far, it has never been a result of a client making a mistake, purely because clients have this file called a slashing DB. So every time you sign something, you append an entry in the slashing database. So the next time you update, it first reads in the slashing database if you're going to sign something that would slash you. And if it's true, then you won't do it. Usually the issue comes when people try to get really creative or set this up wrong, or they have multiple slashing databases or multiple keys in multiple locations. But if you have a really like dumb setup, with one node, one slashing database, chances of something going wrong are quite low. It's very easy primitive.
So no accidents with the updates, clients updates, right?
No,
Or
hasn't
this
happened
time.
so
Yeah,
far.
that's good. That's good. Thank you.
Yeah, it has happened with updates on Kubernetes, but it's because they had set up their slashing database protection wrong. So it's like a super user making a mistake.
Thank you. Boma, you also have a question in the comments, but do you want to read that, or yeah?
Okay, this is a different question. I wanted to know, is there like will I say a guideline that you guys have in place for network-based attack on the consensus layer? Is there something you guys do in terms of securing it, or if something happens, this is what we're going to do in terms of network-based attacks?
I don't think there's a very strong guideline. It's more or less just the steps that I detailed. So if there's an issue, create a group, try and find the minimum set of people who need to be informed, and then start digging into what the problem is, and I guess try and increase the variables in the set until you find what has happened. So there's no real like guidebook, I think, but that's a very similar process for any debugging. You try to minimize the number of variables as much as possible, add variables one by one until you find what the issue is.
I think in more like corporate environment or like centralized structures, you have sort of a checklist, like, file of
Yeah,
implemented. You have to like, okay, we have this error, I go through this checklist, right? But in Ethereum, like that's just not possible. There's no one person to fix anything.
really
It
isn't.
needs to be a coordination every time. So you need to start just talking to people. Yeah. We
Last
have.
time there was actually even this issue that Tony and I triggered that ended up being a mainnet update, but we triggered it on Sepolia. So Tony had this really nice transaction. He wanted to just see how this transaction would work on a devnet. And the issue is that Geth has a limit. It won't accept this transaction. So he tried submitting it, it didn't work. And he's like, hey, Pari, can you figure out a way to submit this transaction? I knew that Bezu has an overridable limit. So I tried overriding it on our Bezu nodes and it wasn't possible. But I spoke to the Bezu team who also run nodes on, I think it was Sepolia, and they managed to update it and get it to run on their system. So the transaction went through. We were like, yeah, cool, easy, left to the evening. And at some point, someone on Twitter noticed that a bunch of nodes were offline on Sepolia. Chase. He works at QuickNode, and their monitoring went off before our monitoring did. So he reached out, and I was like, "Yeah, what happened?" And then we got the basic group up and running, and we started debugging. Okay, this is the transaction, and immediately it hit a flag. Yeah, this is the transaction Tony wanted submitted. What did you do, Tony? And then added him in the group. Then the next thing we figured out was that it was an engine API limitation because we bypassed the JSON RPC limitation on one node, but the engine API had a different limitation. And then it also hits you that this is exploitable on mainnet. So this technically could have taken down mainnet very easily. And because it's live on Sepolia, someone who spends a lot of time analyzing it could have figured it out and exploited this on mainnet. So we had to do this very quickly. Then the question comes in, yeah, except AI alerting is someone on Twitter. Then the question comes in, how do you do a rollout, right? If Geth updates saying fixes engine API limit, this basically means someone's going to roll this, someone's going to exploit this in no time. So you have to hide it amongst other changes. And thankfully, we had the Denkun upgrade relatively soon. So we shipped the change under the guise of the Denkun upgrade. So the fix was in the Denkun upgrade technically. And then the question is also, how do you fix it? Do all clients need a patch? Do one client need a patch? It was an interesting evening and not what one would have expected. But yeah, you have to be creative.
It's always hard discussion with these like 0 days or this sort of fixes in clients where you you fix it in a client and you tell people like a couple of weeks later or so. And there's been like 3 years ago when something was triggered, there was this discussion in Get how to even handle these because you want to be honest, but then somebody triggers an accident and so on. Yeah, but it's really cool because Pari, like literally 2 weeks ago, we had Tony here, who at one point, yeah, I had this transaction, and there, Pari, he's the greatest guy in Ethereum. I love Pari so much. I just sent him this transaction, and he makes it work for me. Yeah, so we just learned the other side of the story. Yeah, it's great. Thanks, Pari.
Yeah, especially that transaction, because I didn't think about it being an exploit. No one thought about it being an exploit. But it also introduced a new class of attacks. Because now we know that if you put a limit on the engine API, you also have to put it on the JSON RPC or vice versa, which, yeah, I guess you have to break some eggs to learn how to cook.
So we have last few minutes. Rahul, do you want to finish maybe with last
Yeah,
question or
yeah,
something quick? Yeah.
sure. Yeah. So you mentioned like exploiting on online letter could probably expose the bug to everyone else. Have you seen a real world use case of that, like a bug that was out in the open and someone figured it out and tried to exploit it?
I think the incentive for breaking protocol itself is not too clear, but examples of someone testing an exploit to, I don't know, Uniswap or like some dApp, definitely. People have done that before. And they've, like, if you do some chain analysis, you'll see that someone has tried a similar thing on a testnet before doing it on mainnet. So 100% the process exists, but breaking something on the protocol level, I haven't seen before.
I think it happened 3 years ago. After I think it was after London or so. Remember there was optimism triggering something which was fixed. But then there were like two of these incidents. One when Nethermind for oh man, it's been a while. But I will look it up
Yeah.
because I think somebody just looked at a diff and like, oh, what is this doing here? And
Oh,
maybe he was malicious. I agree. What I wanted to emphasize, yeah, there is no direct incentive. Like if you manage to find vulnerability in some DeFi application, you can directly make money. But just like preventing few validators to lose money is not gonna make you anything.
yeah. I also think there was something with Nethermind with the diff, but I also wasn't sure what it was. There was actually one Nimbus bug that was very interesting. Um, I don't know if it was a mainnet issue or something. The client have tried a bunch to figure out what the issue was. We tried a bunch, we couldn't find it. So we just did like a binary search. We kept rolling back which version we used until we found the earliest version that didn't have the issue. And then binary searched our way to the commit that was broken. It took about 4 hours, also really useful to have kurtosis for this because we could just keep doing the exploit and keep doing it. And then we found the exact commit. And then the person was able to figure out what the bug was and Nimbus patched it. That was, I think, the funniest. Like, I don't know. After a few hours of debugging it, I'm also feeling useless. I'm like, cool. I'm just gonna binary research where the issue is.
Very well. We are at the full hour. We gotta wrap it up here. I'm sure people have more questions and follow-ups, but it's been yeah, we gotta switch to another call as well. So thank you so much, Murray. Yeah, it's
Yes.
great. Um,
Yeah.
it's fun to chat with you as always, and I hope, folks, if you have any more questions, there are some that we didn't manage to answer from the chat, but Pari's available. He's here. He's happy to chat. So in Discord, we can open a thread. We can follow up there. But yeah,
Sounds good.
thank you so much for the our AMA. I really appreciate it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
Thank you
thanks
guys for
so
having
much.
me. Hope it was enjoyable.
Yeah, I believe that we learn a lot and also get inspired. Yeah, guys, go ahead and break things. Have a great week. We'll see you next week.
Break things not on mainnet. Break things on mainnet.
Yeah. Go ahead, break the dev nets. Yeah, awesome. And you hopefully you most of you folks will have a chance to meet Pari in DEF CON. So
Yes,
in like
definitely.
only less than 2 months, I guess. Yeah. We'll
Looking
see you
forward to see
around.
you there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks everyone. Thanks everyone for the questions and Pari, thanks again for
Of
all the
course.
great
And
answers.
again, if someone wants access to the data to do some analysis, please reach out. We're happy to help out EPF fellows with that.
Awesome. Thanks a lot. Yeah,
Cool.
thanks everyone. Have a great day.
See you.
Bye bye.